So we begin or actually continue our series on Joseph, and we find today in our readings that Joseph's life of up and downs continued. Started out, he knows from last week that Joseph's brothers betrayed him and they sent him into, he was a slave, went to Egypt. And then he's but God takes care of him, and he's kind of raised up a little bit again. He was the captain of the guard, Potiphar's household, and everything he did, it was successful because God was with him. But then, it doesn't last. Potiphar's wife decides he's very handsome, wants to be with him. Pretty soon she makes up a story about him, and he finds himself in prison again. So here, once again, the Lord is with him. He's kind of raised up. The guard in charge of the prison sees that everything that Joseph does, touches, everything around him is successful. So he's kind of given some authority again. So he's got these ups and downs. And I guess, like for him, what is it that keeps him sane through all of this? I mean, he doesn't know what's going to be happening, and he has no control over his situation. But what it appears from reading the story, and hopefully you heard this too. I know I just kind of took bits and pieces of that chapter 39 and 40. But one thing he realizes is that God is with him, that God loves him. And there's another thing which he tells the wife, which is that he will not sin. So there's kind of two things there that are really important to him. One, he recognizes God's with him. And the other thing is his behavior. He knows it's important to act a certain way. And this is kind of helping to keep him successful in at least what he's a part of, right? So for him, that's almost like the bigger picture. So this is what I've been thinking about, and it came up again in Sunday school, and this always happens. What is the big picture in life? How do we keep the big picture in front of us enough so that it can help us through the good times and the down times? How do we do that? And we know we can't be perfect in the sense we can't know everything. That was something that came up to me in Sunday school. We can't really know everything, but we can have some sense of a larger picture. And one of the reasons we have this gift of at least trying to figure out what is the bigger picture in life is because of the gift we're giving, and this came up in our lesson as well. We call it rationality. Okay, so our rationality. And when we, that word kind of brings up some different thoughts. Maybe we might think of like to rationalize. Maybe we're trying to come up with reasons for doing something. Maybe we shouldn't if we rationalize. Or if we think of, it has to do with our mind, But one of the reasons, and I have to confess I did write about this in the Plains Banner here in September, but I love it so much I had to say it again, was that the way that I understand this word is because of this part right here, ratio. And there is an author, his name is Douglas Taylor, and as he defined rationality, he said, rationality is the ability to see life in the perspective of eternity, right? So not just to see the here and now, not just to see like this physical world right in front of us, but to see it in the perspective of eternity. And he said it's to see the ratio of what is life here and what is life hereafter. How do we see the ratio in all that we experience in life of what is just here and what is life hereafter? I thought this was the neatest way to think about this word, How do we really see what's happening in the perspective of eternity? That is a huge question. But it really brings us to this point about, you know, when we have a bigger picture of something, it helps us to navigate the world. But it's easy maybe at times, bless you, Margaret, you know, to maybe not have a bigger picture. So this is where we find ourselves in our story. And this is what I've been thinking about. Because Potiphar's wife, it's hard to imagine she was having any sense of the bigger picture, right? I mean, she was really just basing what she wanted on what she saw and right in the immediate context of things. It's hard to imagine she sat down and thought, what will this do to my marriage? What will this do to my relationship with God? But instead, she pursues Joseph just because she wants to have that relationship with him. And it's appearances, or just what is based on appearances, that her husband believes her. So she takes his coat. Joseph ran off without his coat. And she takes that coat and she uses it as the reason. She says, see what he did? You know, he's insulted me. And just because of pure appearances, Potiphar doesn't think, what's the bigger picture here? You know, is my wife really honest about this? God has been with Joseph in everything he's done, but all of a sudden he's just turned at 180, you know? There's no, like, bigger picture. So he's thrown into prison, right? So this is how we can see this story on one level, is that it's to be in prison is a time of temptation. So are we tempted to think in the short term, just based off of what we see, what we feel, what we hear? Or, the part of that this is temptation, or do we try and see what's happening, whatever it is in our life, in the context of the bigger picture? Are we big picture thinkers? One of the ministers I was with this week defined herself. She said she kind of imagined herself as a big picture thinker. And I was like, that would be a good thing to have on your resume, you know? I'm a big picture thinker. But how do we do that? And how do we get to that point? So it's all about trying to imagine life, approaching it knowing that there's this whole deeper side to it than what we can see. So this is what we talk about here, is the ratio of trying to see the ratio of like the natural, for example, or to the spiritual. You know, we could even call it like another phrase. We could use like our external, what's external in life versus what's deep inside, what's internal. Okay. So when Emanuel Swedenborg wrote about this particular story, he said Potiphar's wife is like natural, not spiritual truth. And Joseph is like spiritual truth. So for example, you know, he gave examples. He said, you know, if you hear that phrase in the Bible that the poor shall inherit the kingdom of heaven, the poor shall inherit the earth, you would think, if you're just thinking naturally, that you would have to live in poverty to receive God's blessings, right? Where if you're thinking from a deeper spiritual truth, you would say, well, it means I'm poor in spirit, and rich or poor doesn't have so much to do with it in terms of money, but more my spirit. And if I think I'm poor in spirit, that means I think I really don't have anything of my own. God is giving me all the goodness and gifts and wisdom, everything in my life. I don't own it, so I'm poor in spirit. And that would be thinking from a spiritual place. Thinking of natural, not spiritual, you could say, everybody in the world who's not connected to me, I don't need to care about. Right? Whereas if you're thinking from a spiritual truth, you would say, everybody is a child of God. And what is most, and what is deeper, is that God's goodness, we find that goodness in everybody, that goodness is our deepest neighbor in some ways. You know, to love the neighbor. I'm going to love the good in everybody. And I'm going to try and find ways that we unite as a people and care about the good. And that would be thinking from a spiritual place. The other example he mentioned, he said, to think from a natural but not spiritual place is to think that this earth and our life here is our destination. There is no more. And this is something that came up as well this morning. But to think from a spiritual place is to realize that that our time here will seem like a day in the life of what it will feel like in eternity. You know, to think from the natural but not spiritual place from the Bible is to think it's a historical book. It's just made up by men over the years, and it does have some good things in it, and that's about it. But to think from the spiritual place is to say it's the Word of God, and that deeper and deeper layers are there for us. So this is the question. How do we approach life? And how do we approach the good times, the bad times, the decisions we need to make? Where do we find ourselves? And this is what this story is about. So if you could think of a time of temptation when you're trying to decide what is going to be my motivation, really. You know, this natural or the spiritual. Now this is where he meets those two dreamers. He meets the cupbearer and he meets the baker. And I'm just going to add their names down here. The cupbearer, and if you'll notice, what's kind of interesting is the cupbearer is about drink. He would be serving wine, water, but wine to Pharaoh, right? And then we have the baker, and so we have bread. And it just so happens that another place we have bread and wine coming into our story, right? Well, the things of drink, like wine, are things that will serve our understanding, okay? And the things of bread are things that serve our will. These are servants, right? So what in life, as our experiences, are we finding are serving the way we think about things and the way we feel about things? And we want them to be servants. So they stand for this kind of more, they're more natural, kind of the sensory level of things. But they have these prophetic dreams. And the one is going to live, and the one has to die. Now the cupbearer, he dreams of what? Does anyone remember what's in his dreams? It's vines, and budding, and the blossoming, and the grapes. So he is seeing the way a mind can grow and unfold, and it's kind of this prophetic image of what our understanding can embrace. But the baker, he's got these baskets of bread on his head, right? The food is in the top for Pharaoh. Now, I will say it's interesting, but whatever version Swedenborg was using, there was holes in that basket. And it doesn't come out in our scripture reading for today, which I was sorry about. But his version, it had holes, and this is meaningful. Because so there's those three baskets on top of each other, and the food is in here, and it's all escaping. So we would say the big picture is that God's love and wisdom is kind of, it's hard to think in space and time. Swedenborg said this does not help at all to try to think in space and time about divine things. But if you could just imagine that love and that wisdom is like coming into us, right, as vessels in a way. And it's kind of trying to find a way, affecting our inmost and kind of trying to find a way out so we can share it. So we're talking about it, we're trying to hopefully act on it, do things. This is all of God's love for you. It's at your core, and it's all escaping. And it's got holes in the basket. And what he said in here is that if we've got a basket with holes in it, this is like the times when we might feel grieved, or we might feel revengeful, or hatred. Any of those things on any level, that means we've got holes in our basket. And all of that love is just, it's just like the past the 5-second rule, you know? It just escaped and we can't pick it up and there's nothing we can do with it. Our tradition teaches that our mind will be with us forever. Our ability to try and comprehend God, to grow, to understand what we might need to learn so we can become better people, will be with us forever. Even if it's obscure at times and we aren't seeing it, that ability will be with us forever. But this guy over here, the will, we need a new will. If we're feeling all of these things, if we're feeling greed or hatred or any of those things, we don't want that with us. And so we have to have a new will. And the baker, unfortunately, his life is about to end. But in the bigger picture, that's a good thing, because we want to have to form a new will. And part of this all bears, you know, how we understand what's happening to us, how we use our mind. This is all going to affect how we view our experiences in the world. And if we can see the bigger picture or not, and remember the bigger picture. Now, I wanted to mention, because of course I had been using this book. There's one part, this Path of Integrity was the book that I had been using for the series. And so they actually labeled this section with these dreams and what happens as distractions. Trying to cut out the distractions. I'm not sure if that's a good, you know, that's one way of looking at it. But they give, so, you know, when I mention like natural versus spiritual, we're thinking, well, there's this deeper reality, deeper spiritual truths to think of, you know, and to think from, that this isn't all of our journey and things like that. This book gives some little practical things to think about, okay? So I'd like to just read that and see if any of this holds true for you. Okay. So if you think about, you have a dream or a goal or some way you're trying to move into a better place of being. Let's say it's something as simple as you want to become healthier. But your distraction, or the natural part, is fast food. Okay? So it gets in the way because you forget. There's this bigger picture. There's this long-term goal I want, and I'm going to forget about it. Okay. Your goal or dream is to get enough sleep, but your distraction is that you're web surfing before bed. So it gets in the way of what this bigger goal is. Okay. Daily morning jog. This is something I want to do. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get healthier. I'm going to be in a better place. The distraction, the natural part, the warmth of my bed. And doesn't that fit? I mean, talk about like this, just the plain like sense things, like the warmth of the bed gets in the way of the bigger picture for who you want to be, you know, because it may not be just a morning jog. It could be you want to get up and read the Bible. You want to have a prayer life you want that is, you know, that is deeper. But the warmth of the bed sounds very good, and it's like when that external is leading or trying to lead the internal, that's when we get into problems. But if our internal can be leading the external, that is the proper order. That's the goal. Here's another one. Closeness with my husband, distraction, body insecurities. Or kindness to my children is a larger goal, but I find that my distraction is that I'm just becoming impatient with things and time and the physical things getting in the way. So, there are many levels to think of this story. I mean, we can think of the larger picture things, and we can try and find that in the details of our life. And what I might just close with is simply what Joseph says to the cupbearer when he leaves, because he knows he's going to be free, and he says, remember me. You know, remember I helped you out and told you this dream. And he will, eventually that will lead to his saving, but just remember those words. Remember, I am with thee. I am with thee. May we try and remember, whatever is happening, there is a deeper spiritual truth to work from. There is a larger picture to be seen. And if we can just try and keep our minds open to that, we will, I think, find ourselves a little further on that path.